Hello, everyone, and welcome to This America Walks webinar. I see people are showing up, but I'm going to start anyway. Um, Today's webinar, Small Cities and Transit, Why It Matters. We've got hundreds of registrants for this one, and as I said, they're just arriving, but we're really glad to have you here. I mean, we're America Walks, but we love talking about transit because transit is the middle leg of a walking trip, or it's a walking extender. And it's that combination of transit, walking, and land uses close to each other that really create the opportunities for people to get physical activity into their everyday lives. So we're grateful to have this opportunity to highlight this report from Just Strategy, Small Cities and Transit, Why It Matters. Mike McGinn, Executive Director of America Walks. Want to thank the folks that make this possible. First is the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and their Active People, Healthy Nation program. Really encourage you all to check it out. The goal of Active People, Healthy Nation and why they support us is to help develop the types of places where people can walk and get physical activity as part of their everyday lives. It has tremendous positive health effects. And in fact, it's really the best way to fight chronic diseases that don't really have, um, vaccines or a way to prevent the disease other than, the vaccine, so to speak, is everyday physical activity. And it makes a huge difference. And that's what all of the health evidence shows. It's a great program. We're proud to have been part of it for years, and we're proud of all the partners we get to work with in it. Also want to thank Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which supports America Walks, as well as GM, Devo Good Foundation, and Tool Design. We also have to thank our individual donors who support our work. It enables us to um, uh, be a voice for walkability at a national level, as well as support local advocacy. So if you have not yet been a member and supporter, consider joining us, and we're going to make a pitch at the end too, so hang around for that. If you have a question, go find this Q&A box and write it in there. We'll do our best. We'll be able to answer some of them right in there, but we'll save other ones for the panelists as well. And delighted to introduce our webinar speakers. Molly McKinley is the co-author of the Small City Big Moves report. And one of the things we really liked about this webinar was that it was focusing on small cities. We oftentimes think about transit as being a big city issue, right? It's a New York, Chicago, or LA kind of thing. But for the cities highlighted in this report, between 50 and 200,000 people, really integral to the health of the community. And there's a significant portion of the population that is going to need transit on a regular basis. And this is often something that is not resourced the way it needs to be, whether it's from local, state, or federal sources. And when you consider the number of people who do not have access to a vehicle on a regular basis because they're young, old, disabled, or don't have the economic means to own a car, you can see why transit it matters. And it matters in small cities as well as big cities. It matters in even smaller towns and cities as well than 50,000, but this report focuses on 50 to 200,000. So Molly will go over the uh, the overview of the report, share that with you, and then we're going to hear a couple of case studies. Chad Ingles from now in the blow it, the program manager at Kootenai County Public Transportation. He's going to have to correct my pronunciation. I did it wrong in the before. Now I didn't get it right. That's Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, Northern Idaho. Beautiful, beautiful small city. If you ever get a chance to go to Coeur d'Alene and adjoining areas. And Heather Dalmolin she's the CEO and General Manager of the Mountain Line in Flagstaff, Arizona, and she'll share her experiences there as well. So with that, I'm going to turn off my slides and turn it over to Molly McKinley.
Great, thank you, Mike. I'm going to share my screen before I do anything else because I can only do one thing at a time. All right. So, hi everyone, and thanks so much to America Walks for hosting us to share this report on this webinar. Thanks to all of you for joining and for your interest in transit in small cities. I'm Molly McKinley, and I'm a co-author of this report. So let's jump in. So Just Strategy is the organization that facilitated the development of this report, and they build powerful issue campaigns that win. They educate organizers, movement leaders, and develop effective strategies for racial and economic justice movements. And some of their current campaigns today are the National Campaign for Transit Justice, Transit Works for America, and Communities for Our Colleges. So why small cities? So we'll start with just, why transit? In 2023, more than 7 billion trips were taken on public transit across the country in small towns, big cities, rural communities, everything in between. And we know that demand for transit is growing, especially as the cost for car ownership increases and fewer young people are interested in driving. We also know that our population as a nation is aging rapidly, and folks need other options to get around as they age. Transit provides an affordable option that allows everyone, including older adults, folks with disabilities, young people, people without cars, to just have access to their community, have access to their friends and family, have access to jobs, healthcare, all of the fun things that we do in our lives. Transit makes that possible for so many people and is a really affordable way for everyone to be able to do that. And so to meet this demand, transit leaders are finding innovative ways to provide that transit service. But as we'll discuss further in the presentation, and I'm sure throughout our conversation, transit agencies are also having to make difficult trade-offs today, shifting and even cutting service as resources are insufficient while demand continues to rise. So this report, like Mike mentioned, is focused on small cities, places with populations between 50,000 and 200,000. And there are over 300 of them across the country in almost every state, I think, except for Rhode Island. And transit serves a really essential role in these communities, but they're rarely studied. I think especially a lot of leaders think about, transit in big cities, and then they think about the rural program. But what we're talking about is kind of this really what I as a report author, I am obviously very interested in this, but, a really interesting kind of intersection of, some elements of urban life and then also these connections and being a hub for rural communities. And it's such a, these transit systems are so critical to kind of making the ends meet between the different parts of our states and the different types of communities that we have. And, we know Congress is in the process of thinking about how to fund transit program moving forward. So we wanted to just make sure to highlight this segment of our nation's transit services. So that process of federal transportation reauthorization is especially important for these communities, which rely more heavily on transit funding than their peers. So you can see in these charts, we're looking at operating expenses. So that's the funding that provides service, funds the operators and mechanics. That's like the operation side of things versus capital, which will be on the next slide here. So when we're looking at small urban areas, they're getting about nearly 37% of their operations funding is coming from the federal government, where when you look at transit agencies as a whole, that's about 16%. And the disparity is even wider when we look at capital expenses. So these are the funding for building the stuff, buying the buses, those hard costs. And in small urban areas, just over 60% of that funding comes from the federal government. And then when we look at all transit agencies, it's less than 40%. So small cities, I mentioned there's over 300 of them across the country. They vary significantly in their physical and cultural characteristics. Many of them include some type of historical dependence on a single industry that a community formed around, a location near recreational areas, of some type of college or university. There's something that's kind of that's the main driver of the economy in these communities. And then, as I mentioned earlier, these communities are also serving as these regional hubs for surrounding rural areas, offering healthcare, shopping, and other services that just aren't available in smaller areas. As I already spoiled this point for you, the small urban areas are located in 49 states, all except for Rhode Island, and then a number of our territories. And transit in these communities, covers a really wide range of geographies. So there's a transit agency in Ohio that covers a 6 square mile area. And then there's, one in Texas that covers over 15,000 square miles. So this report is not meant to, represent every single community, but just, I think, provides a lot of snapshots into what does transit look like here? What can we be learning from what these agencies are doing and how they're providing service and meeting community need. And then these areas provided over 170 million trips in 2023, which was 72% of pre-pandemic ridership. Ridership has continued to recover since the pandemic. And you'll see this in some of our case studies that we'll mention as well, that these transit agencies are really recovering well, and people continue to express demand for more service. So this is just a map to show you where all of those small cities are across the country. They're, nearly everywhere in all parts. I'm sure you can name the ones that are in your state. So many of these agencies in smaller cities run multiple types of services. They're running, traditional fixed route services that run between major destinations. They're offering demand response service, and they're operating a variety of vehicles. So this photo here on the slide is from Sioux Area Metro in South Dakota, and they offer fixed route service using kind of those big traditional buses that we're used to in larger urban areas, but then they also use vans for some of their on-demand service. One of my favorite parts of this report was just talking to the people in small cities who are running the transit systems. I got to know Mike Witten, who couldn't make it today, but he's the executive director of Manchester Transit Authority in New Hampshire. And Mike, when he was a kid, was really into buses, and he was really interested in transportation. And he went on to college, and then he drove a bus when he was in college, and now he's the director of this transit agency. And I remember getting off the call with him and talking with a colleague about how cool it is that someone like that is in this leadership position now, who just it feels like transit is in his bones, and he really cares about serving the community. And I think that's one of the most encouraging things about this report to me was getting to know the people who are running this transit service and seeing how close they are to the community and really wanting to deliver for their neighbors was kind of this prevailing sentiment that I felt throughout our research for the report. And that felt different to me than some of the advocacy I had done in other jobs where I was more focused on larger agencies that have lots and lots of people, and they have an executive who's maybe not from the area, or just it felt like people were so invested in these transit, in just providing good quality transit service for their neighbors. And Mike was a great example of that. And, when we were talking with him about, this concept of focusing on transit in small urban areas, he gave us this great quote that, small urban transit is the anti-Goldilocks. It's too big, too small for the big cities, but too big to be really rural. And so we're focused in this report on finding that approach that's like just right. So we'll jump into the case studies. I'll give kind of an overview of this, and then we'll hear from Chad and Heather, who will speak to their case studies. So to tell the story of what transit looks like in small urban communities, we developed 7 case studies that explore the role that transit plays in their economies and quality of life, as well as the opportunities and challenges that they see ahead. And we selected these case study cities based on several factors, including the performance of their transit systems and the locations in different parts of the country. We know, again, that we can't capture everything in 7 case studies, but we do think that these are really useful for just building an understanding of what the landscape of small urban cities and their transit needs looks like. These are our 7 case study cities. We have Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, Flagstaff, Arizona, Jonesboro, Arkansas, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Manchester, New Hampshire, Rocky Mount, North Carolina, and Clemson, South Carolina. So I'll go through a couple of themes that jumped out at us throughout this report. In every one of these case studies, transit is a critical part of supporting the local economy, regardless of the types of industries that exist there. Case study cities use transit to support manufacturing, healthcare, education, tourism, you name it, whatever kind of the founding or like central part of the economy is, transit is a key part of that in these places. Also, small urban systems are modernizing. They're upgrading their technology, they're improving customer experience, and it's leading to increased ridership. The case study cities have seen consistent growth since the pandemic as customers respond to these improvements. This was something that was really surprising to me in starting this reporting. The first, I think, case study interview that I did for this report was with Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and just hearing about their, really, they took a significant approach to how they were modernizing their system, and they're offering on-demand service and ordering rides on your phone. And they did this big overhaul that's really created great demand for transit service there. And that was unexpected to me as someone who didn't know too much about small cities and transit service before this. And then, as I mentioned before, small urban cities are regional hubs for surrounding rural areas, and transit provides just a very critical link between highly rural locations and regional services. Especially, I've thought so much about in this report about the connections to healthcare in particular. I grew up in a rural community and, have seen healthcare hubs in rural areas just close. And I know that folks still need to access those services, and to have transit, that's serving those areas is really just essential. There's no other way to put it. Next is that transit agencies that serve these small urban areas have less dense bureaucracies than their larger counterparts, which can allow them to be more nimble in meeting changing travel patterns and demand. This was one of my favorites. I think that, these small transit agencies are so nimble and really seem to be coming to the table, at least the folks that we talk to, kind of trying to start from a place of yes. Like, how can we meet this demand? Let's problem solve, let's figure it out, instead of just coming forward and, when they're confronted with a new challenge or an opportunity, instead of saying no, these folks are saying yes. And they're just really just so scrappy and resourceful. And it was just, these stories I'm so excited about them because they're really stories of people and government working for people. They, folks really making the decisions that need to be made to serve the greatest amount of people and have a strong impact in the community. Next, in almost every case study city that we worked in, there are strong local partnerships that have allowed for greater efficiencies and increased transit's ability to meet the demands of the local economy. And this looks like partnerships between universities and transit agencies, between businesses, between healthcare hubs. It's really like this partnership effect that's, people in healthcare, people in business are seeing the value that transit provides to our communities, and they're making the choice to make investments that help, provide more service. And then, while progress is being made, and I think that these, especially our case study cities, are doing really the very best that they can with the resources they have in, really exciting, innovative ways, funding constraints still inhibit their ability to meet the full demand. And that's something I'm sure I'll hear about from Heather and Chad here in a second. So I will turn it over to Chad Ingle, who is going to talk to us about transit in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
Thank you, Molly. So located in northern region of Idaho, Kootenai County is one of the state's fastest growing urban areas, with a population exceeding 121,000 in that urbanized zone. So this growth has been fueled in part by the city of Coeur d'Alene's strong appeal as an outdoor lifestyle, which attracts remote workers and retirees, while its economy has shifted from mining and logging to tourism, healthcare, retail, and construction. So despite this progress, some persistent challenges remain. The state of Idaho provides no state funding for public transit, and local jurisdictions cannot place transit tax initiatives on the ballot. That forces us to rely on creative partnerships to meet federal matching requirements. So CityLink, the local transit provider, is managed by Kootenai County in collaboration with the Coeur d'Alene tribe. We operate 3 fixed routes, ADA paratransit services, and non-emergency medical transportation in partnership with our local hospital. To further enhance mobility, we provide an on-demand service as well. Our Ring-A-Ride service, as we call it, serves extended coverage to seniors and people with disabilities outside the main service area. Next slide. CityLink operates without state financial support, like I mentioned, making federal funding and local partnerships essential. To meet federal match requirements, we rely on in-kind contributions like shared services, as well as annual cash support from local jurisdictions. This involves consistent advocacy and coordination with community partners. This ongoing effort demands consistent outreach to maintain support for public transit, often on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. While demand continues to grow due to a rising population, our capacity to expand or enhance transit services is constrained by limited local revenue options and the significant federal matching requirements imposed on transit agencies. Next slide. So Project Search, which is a high school transition program for young adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, is one of the communities most impacted by limited transit access. Project Search relies heavily on public transportation to get students to their internships and later to their employment. So if you take Durant, a recent student who lost access to his internship at Shabby Fabrics when it moved to Post Falls in a location outside of CityLink's Curvis service area. For Durant and others, limited transit equals limited opportunity for meaningful employment and independence. Next slide. And then there's Bryce, another Project Search graduate. He rides CityLink daily to his job at Les Schwab Tires in Hayden. As Bryce puts it, if I didn't have access to the bus, I would be kind of stuck. Even local leaders recognize the need. Post Falls City Administrator Shelley Endron supports enhanced service. Her own mother uses Ring-A-Ride for medical appointments. But again, resources are stretched thin, reducing the ability to enhance the current services. So these stories remind us that when we truly look, we find many community members, often in unexpected places, whose lives are positively and directly impacted by public transportation. All right, and I will turn it over to Heather for further.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. So I'm Heather Dalmolin. I do serve for the transit program in Flagstaff, Arizona. As you can see in the picture, it's probably not what you think of when you think of Flagstaff. We do have pine trees and we are on a mountain. And so we have a very diverse need in our community. We are a fast-growing urbanized area. We first had a population of 50,000 people identified in 1999, and we're up to almost 80,000 persons today. And I'll just point out that is less our university. Our university has an undergraduate on-campus population of around 24,000 students in addition to the population you see here. We're very proud that our system does serve 83% of our community with access to transit, and our services have grown significantly over the years. You can see here ridership has grown between 22 and 23 by 21%, but since we launched our program in 2001, we actually have grown our ridership by 792%. We do have year-round outdoor recreation in our community, but most importantly, as Molly kind of talked to a little bit, our small urban community is a hub of services for healthcare, for education, and businesses. So we have a university, a community college, and we have the largest regional healthcare facility in our community. And next slide. We're very proud that we were able to maintain our services throughout the pandemic. We did see a large decrease in ridership, mostly related to our university. We do transport university students to off-campus housing and back and forth between those housing opportunities. And with the pandemic and their alternate schedules, we did see a very large decrease in ridership. I'm not going to read all of the bullet points on here, but I want to talk a little bit to the comments that Molly made, and really all the way back to what Mike Whitten in Massachusetts said. Mountain Line works very hard to be sure we're finding the right transit solutions for our community. So we partner with our university to serve them as I talked about for off-student housing. But right now we're also building a new transfer center for our community. It is a transfer center that was designed with our rural partners in mind. As mentioned, we serve a lot of those outlying areas around the city of Flagstaff within the community, but we don't actually provide any service outside of the community. We do, however, want to encourage connections. So our new transfer center will have the option for our rural services and private entities to pull right into those transfer centers and transfer passengers seamlessly to our system. Additionally, we are very focused in our community on improving bicycle and pedestrian ways. We all know that bus riders start on foot or bike to access bus stops and other things. And while we have healthy and robust bus stop programs, we don't have complete sidewalks in our community. It's common, right, in small urban environments. And so we know we need to do that. And you can see on the bottom of this slide a little description of a past program we developed with our school district here in Flagstaff. We face the same CDL driver shortage that much of the nation has faced, both in transit programs as well as school bus programs. And so we partnered to reduce the need for drivers in both of our divisions and reduced yellow bus service and are instead putting those students on our public transit service, middle school and high school students specifically. And again, in order to facilitate that connectivity for those students, bike paths and sidewalks are crucial and key. And then the last thing that I'll just touch on is serving jobs and employers. We've developed a PASS program to encourage employers to give their employees free bus passes provided by the employer to allow those improved access to jobs. So those are just a couple of ways that in our community, we are trying to be part of overall solutions for the community so that people have the access that they need to education, to jobs, to medical, or just to leisure activities. Thank you, and I'll turn it back to Mike.
Yeah, thank you. And thank all three of our panelists, and come on, join us on screen. Molly and Heather and Chad. We have had some great questions in the Q&A. I was really struck by something, Chad, that you mentioned, which was that there's no state money for local transit. I thought I heard you say, and state law even prevents the municipality or the local region from doing a ballot measure to raise funds. I presume that would be a property tax or sales tax type of measure.
Right.
I'm curious, what is it like in Flagstaff, Arizona, and for Heather, and then for Molly, did you find any? What were the findings in other cities about restrictions on financing for transit?
Thanks, Mike. So Arizona, like my friend Chad, does not provide any state funding for transit programs. So they don't have any reoccurring funding source. They have an opportunity for some capital match, but it's very hard to get. We're competing with roads, highways, and municipalities for that funding. So we have no state funding. However, I have the fortune of being able to, as a local municipality, have a tax that is dedicated to local funding for transit specifically. We have a sales tax in our community. It was first approved in 2000, and it was actually just renewed by the voters in 2024, and it was increased by 68%. So we got 68% plus up in funding, and it's all going to go right into improving our transit programs.
Molly?
And let's see, I know it was common in a number of the communities that we spoke to who don't get state funding or they couldn't put something to the ballot. I know that Manchester, New Hampshire is one of those. I believe that Rocky Mount, North Carolina gets some funding from the state, but it's pretty limited. And then I'm trying to remember the others. I know like Coeur d'Alene and Manchester were the two that stood out to me that couldn't go to the voters, which was shocking to me. I was just like, how we need fund if we can't fund it ourselves, what are we supposed to do?
Yeah, I think it's something. So, as background for the viewers and the other panelists, I was mayor of Seattle for one term, and it was it was kind of shocking to me, and before that I was an advocate in the transportation space. It was kind of shocking to me to see the degree to which state legislatures defined the funding sources for cities and towns and counties to fund their entire system, whether it was roads or transit or sidewalks or bike lanes. Um, it so I'm just sharing this, and probably a lot of the viewers know this too, but it felt like the state legislature said, well, our responsibility is the state roads and the state highways. And we got to make sure we maintain those, those are the assets we're responsible for. But then to go kind of a little bit further and say we're also going to restrict how cities and towns can raise money and counties can raise money for their services was kind of surprising. So anyway, that kind of tees up our next question from a grassroots organizer from Tri-Cities, Tennessee. What are some great ideas for the public to advocate for improving public transit in their cities? And since Chad hasn't had to answer it yet, from your experience, what would you say to advocates to talk about for improving public transit in their city?
Well, I think from our perspective, the biggest thing is getting in front of your city council, getting in front of commissioners for the county, going to the public meetings and just asking the questions. I think that's one of the biggest things that individuals can do is make sure that they're attending those public meetings and making sure that their voice is heard about how they want public transportation and how they think it should be improved in the area or how it could be helpful to be best utilized, because we as a public transit agency, we have to seek public input on everything that we do, and we want to hear from the public on what they feel would be a good fit for what's going on with our agency and how we're integrated into the community and how we're all working together, because public transportation is another community asset and it needs to be seen as that. And the more people that speak out about it and go to these public meetings, the better off we're going to be as a whole.
And in your experience, what have you found to be the arguments or the points raised by the public that resonate the most in terms of building support for transit?
Well, it's about making sure that everybody's needs are met. We're making sure that we're, like I talked about, we have a program, Project Search, and that program it meets the individuals who aren't able to live a regular life like everybody else. So they do need people advocating for them on a regular basis. And so anytime we can speak to those populations who really depend on public transportation in order to live the normal life that everybody else takes for granted, then I think it speaks wonders, because whenever we can speak to the heart of people and then show it through data points, it really resonates. And how can you argue back, I guess, is the way that I look at it when you have things like that. So
Heather, both questions, the great ideas that for people to advocate for, and also what have you found tends to move the needle, so to speak, and winning more support in your community?
Yeah, thanks. And I would really echo a lot of what Chad said. Get engaged, get involved, be part of the voice. I think there's this perception that transit serves only one segment of communities, and it's really important that everyone who sees value in transit gets involved and advocates for transit is not just about serving people who don't own cars. It is so much bigger than that. And so we welcome those voices. I think that's how we get involved. And I would say, the first question focused on funding, but a big part of what transit needs is policy support as well. So I live in a community that's not built on a grid. It's not built that's conducive to high frequency transit. We have a lot of dead end roads, a lot of curves, a lot of mountains, but the community could have policies on where development goes that could support transit and transit development. So I would encourage groups to think about too, how to support transit with encouraging communities to think about their development codes and their policies in communities to support transit. And I'm sorry, the second question.
No, I think the second
Great.
question was, uh, arguments or messages that have appeared to resonate with
Yeah.
decision makers or the public as to why to improve transit?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. You know who your elected officials are, know who your city staff are. There is a way to talk about transit to everyone on the face of the earth. You can talk about transit to people who believe in affordable housing. You can talk about transit to people who are keyed in on sustainability and climate. You can talk to people who hate sitting in traffic about transit and how it helps them. If you don't want to get on the bus, it still helps remove somebody potentially from the traffic ways. I think it's just important to really think broadly about what all transit does, and to speak to those messages.
One of the questions was about fares. Have you noticed any interesting trends for how smaller cities handle fares and how that correlates with ridership and budget effects, rates, promotions, et cetera? And I guess we should put into that the offering of fares. I mean, the idea of having students use the bus rather than the school bus system and or employers using it as a benefit. So I'll start with Molly on that if she has anything to go, and then we'll come back to Chad and Heather. So any trends on how fares, what role fares play in the system?
That's a good question. Now I'm like second guessing myself in some of my notes. I think we had one transit agency in Clemson that was fare free. And a number of the transit agencies, I know Sioux Falls, as they were updating and modernizing their system, they took a look at the fares. But I do think that others featured in the report do charge fares. We've seen a variety of things going on regarding fares in big cities, small cities, rural communities. There's not really consistency in I think it just depends on what works for each transit agency. And I think there are also restrictions on, I know in Colorado, we had a restriction that required our transit agency to get a certain amount of its revenue from fares. So there's all kinds of wonky stuff like that going on. But then we didn't encounter any businesses who provided funding for fares or provided transit passes to their employees. But there's a business in New Hampshire. It's called Call Logics, and they moved their headquarters from kind of central, like the central downtown area to outside, and it wasn't served well by transit. And the CEOs saw this, and after a few employees approached her and were like, "Hey, I don't think I'm going to be able to continue working here because I just don't have access to our new location." And so the CEO got on the case, and she got on the phone with the head of the transit agency, and they figured out a solution to, for the business to pitch in and fund the local match requirement for the route that was near their new facility. And now they have a stop that gets served several times a day. And they're hoping to expand that, but she was just calling for other business leaders to be pitching in like this. She really saw the value in the employees that she had for a long time and knew that this was going to be, something that was going to keep those people from being able to continue working for her. And she was going to lose great talent if she didn't find a solution for how to get people to and from work.
Well, actually, I'm going to go to Heather next because I'm interested to hear about that experience. And I know in the city of Seattle, again, this is a big city, but the university actually purchased passes for all of the students in exchange for increased service. And then the school district did the same for the high schools and I think now the middle school. So I'm curious what effect that had on your ridership and bottom line and how it was to work out those relationships in Flagstaff.
Sure. And I will say Flagstaff has had the conversation about fare free, and we made a distinct decision last fall that it was more important to look at funding for expansion of service than it was to make our service fare free. But we do a lot of things that are designed to ensure people have access to transit through fare equity measures, through pass programs, et cetera. So the school district specifically buys bus passes from us for their students. So they're using their transportation funding to buy those bus passes. They do buy them in bulk. So they're getting a discounted rate based on buying them in bulk for all students, whether they use them or not. And we have the same program with many of our employers. The school district ridership in a 12-month period did peak at 100,000 rides. And that was compared to maybe 10,000 rides when we didn't have the pass program in place, where students were buying that pass, but not through the school district. The university specifically, because you brought that program up, currently does not have an agreement with us for fares on behalf of the students. The route that we operate in partnership with the university, it is a single route in our 9-route system. Students do have free access to that route, and we know that's part of the reason the ridership on it is significantly high. It's also our most frequent route, so those two things drive ridership. But we don't yet have a program that allows college or university students throughout our city to have access to our transit system. We're working on that.
You know, I think it has the effect of getting people to use transit. I think for a lot of people, the first time getting on the bus is an adventure. How do you do this? How does this work? Will it go where I want it to go? So, um, um, and I took the bus to school when I was in high school, and yeah, now I know how to get on a bus. So I do think it has an effect on behavior once people experience the bus. They're probably more likely to use it later. Chad, what's the experience in Coeur d'Alene on getting um, employers or schools or other partners to buy service and adjust routes, et cetera, in exchange for that?
So we in Kootenai County, we do not charge a fare for our services. So we are a fare-free service. So we do still encourage partnerships with businesses. And like I talked about with our non-emergency medical transportation, we do partner with our medical facility here in the area, and they help to provide trips for those non-emergency medical trips. And it is one of the great partnerships that we have. It helps to kind of shift a little bit of the ridership that we would be inundated with, and help has it so that the medical provider can then go and they can go further out, and they take care of the operations of that. So they decide, how far out they're able to go, and they can bring patients in so that they can meet their medical needs. And so we have also been seeking partnerships with dialysis facilities in our area as well, because that's another one that uses a lot of public transportation to get to those dialysis trips. So we do continue to seek those partnerships with businesses and with medical facilities, because we know that the need is out there. And as much as it costs for us to be able to run public transportation, we need those partnerships in order to really provide transportation beyond what we currently do. So that is something that we continually work on.
I think there were two questions around public engagement, and I don't know if I should mix them or not, but I was curious. One question I was curious about public engagement strategies used by transit agencies, was the question. And then there was a question for to what degree did the report reach out to riders as opposed to agencies? So I'll give you that one first, Molly, and then I'll give Heather and Chad. I'll give you the second one first to you, Molly. To what degree did the report look at rider input as opposed to agency input?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And so one thing I wish that there were more rider voices represented in the report. Most of the places that we focused on in this report were not places that our organization had like good existing relationships with like local advocates. And so, the folks we interviewed who work for the transit agencies were oftentimes great resources. Chad introduced us to the folks, I think, at Project Search, and we were able to speak with the riders that Chad mentioned, Durant and Bryce, about their experience using the system and what it means for their life. And a number of the other case study folks that we worked with were able to connect us directly with riders. I got on the phone with an older gentleman in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, who the transit director connected me with this one rider in particular, and just thinking about that transit director having that relationship to make that introduction for me, so I could call Larry on the phone and ask him about his experience using the transit service. And we had a conversation about how he uses the service every day. He's able to book it online or book it through a phone call each week, and he uses it to get to the gym and all of his appointments. He's visually impaired, and this service is essential for him. And I think, just also to go back to the first question in this, is what can I do to get better service in my community and elevate the need for transit? It's storytelling. It's connecting with riders, people that you meet on the bus, at the bus stop, letting them know about the public meetings, asking them to show up. Spoiler alert, transit agency board meetings don't get wild attendance, even in larger cities. And so if you bring 3 people who use transit service to the meeting, you've really changed the dynamic, and being able to tell your stories about what does transit service mean for you? What would it look like if transit service was better? What would that mean for your life? And I think also, as mentioned before, like those are things that we need to be elevating to our elected officials, and just letting folks know. I think, a lot of our elected officials don't use transit today in, any range size of community. And when we can demonstrate what it looks like, what transit means, what is transit used for, who rides transit, when we can expand upon that definition, we're able to break down all of those kind of assumptions about who transit is for, and that it's not important, and it's only for this type of person or that type of person. Like, transit makes our community better, and it's our job, as advocates and members of our community, to tell those stories and make that case.
Okay, that just gave me an opening to make a plug before I turn to Chad and Heather for public engagement strategies that they've used, and how they incorporate the rider perspective into their work. Then the plug is that America Walks supports nationally the Week Without Driving. It's first week of October, roughly. You can go to our website or theweekwithoutdriving.org, and really encourage anyone listening to check it out, to engage with it. It's a very very easy way to enter the space. And one of the purposes of it is to encourage local decision makers, local elected officials, local agency folks to try to see what life is like for a week if they did not have access to a vehicle, as so many of the people in their community do not. So to kind of give them that personal perspective of what it's like to get around and why local transit matters so much. So with that, please join us. We managed to hit all 50 states last year, and if there may already be an organization in your community doing it, but if you wanted to get it rolling in your community, we'd love to help you do it. Reach out to us at America Walks. I will turn it over to Chad. What types of public engagement strategies do you use, and how do you ensure you get the transit riders' perspective into the decision making of the agency?
So we will do periodic surveys with our riders. We started doing an initiative where we just have 5 simple questions, and we post it for a month, and we try to get as much input as we can from the riders. And we'll do further in-depth surveys as well from time to time. But we're kind of changing up with our new strategy of monthly introducing 5 different questions so that riders can kind of engage a little bit more with the transit agency, so that we can help to facilitate their needs further as much as we possibly can. And so I think that has been huge in really making sure that there's that relationship between the transit agency and the rider, because we all have ultimately the same goal. We want to move passengers around, they want to ride the bus, and we want to continue to operate. And so that's kind of that good mix there. And that has been really good. And as a part of that, we also do surveys with service providers in the area as far as health and human services. And like I said, with dialysis as well. And so we are putting out surveys for those individuals so that we can really understand from their perspective what ridership looks like, what the needs are for the community from their perspective. And then we've also developed a survey that we're going to be putting out shortly for businesses as well. So in our area, little over $1.5 million in 23 went back into the community that transit spent as just an operational expenses, and it went right back into the community. So we want to really express that and show that we support the local businesses in a huge way. And so being able to let them know this information and then also get their perspective on that, it just really helps to build that relationship again with the transit agency. And of course, anytime that we're doing any structure changes, if there was a fare change or anything of that nature, we also have to hold public meetings where people from the public can come give their input on what we're doing, so that we're following the initiatives of what the community really needs. So.
Heather.
Yeah, I'll just add what we do a little differently. We do a lot of the things that Chad talked about, but we make sure that we're attending city council, because those do get more attendance than, say, our transit board meetings, to tell the public that we have this public opportunity for participation. So just, again, trying to get the word out there. But some of the things that we do that I really appreciate is that we're on our vehicles. So our entire leadership team is required to use our transit programs, not just to come to work, but to get out and ride. And the goal of those rides is to talk to our customers and talk to our staff about what is the real life things that are happening in the field that we oftentimes don't see in the office. But we do our surveys on tablets at our connection centers, on our vehicles. We do public participation meetings, walking public participation meetings. So again, we're where the riders are. I think that's one of the most crucial things for public input. If you deliver a transit service that you assume is correct and it doesn't meet the needs of the public, then you don't have a transit service that's successful. So we want to be where our people are and make sure we're taking that feedback. So we try all the time to just be really creative, ensuring people know about the opportunity to contribute.
I just want to say, if there's anybody out there thinking about running for office one day, as I did, you should get a bus pass and ride the bus, because you are likely to get a question at a candidate forum of, do you have a bus pass? Show it. And when was the last time you rode the bus? And if you haven't asked that question yet at a forum, there's a tip for some of the transit advocates out there. It's a good one, trust me. It's great if you can pull out your bus pass and your opponent cannot. So having said all of that, let's go to the next. There's a series of questions about the role of transit in economic development in the Q&A section. Some of it is, how do we get people to recognize the role of economic development, and or how important is it? And I'm curious, and if I'm mischaracterizing your prior answers, correct me, but it really felt like your prior answers to date have been more about making sure every portion of, the portions of the population are well served and people aren't being left out of the community, so to speak. How powerful has the economic development argument been in your experiences in your cities, and what is the case you've been able to make on economic development based on your transit systems? I'm curious. So I'll go to Chad first.
Like I was talking about before, one of the things that we've really started to push is that economic development, and how transit, by just operating and the operational costs of what we put out there. I mean, there was over $1.5 million in fiscal year 23 that we put back into the community, which again, that's jobs in the community that are really developing and able to continue because we're able to provide that. But that is just our operational costs. That doesn't even go into the next steps as far as when we're providing trips to the local grocery store. Well, how much of that is generated because that individual, the only way that they're able to get to that store is because of public transportation. So it doesn't even take into account any of those trips where they're going to medical appointments. Dialysis is, like I talked about before, is one of the big drivers of public transportation, and they use a lot of it. And it is very costly for those individuals to get to those dialysis trips and to have those dialysis trips. And if they're not able to make those trips, well, then it becomes an even bigger issue. And now if you're calling EMS or whomever to come and pick up that individual, now you're taking even more resources away from the community because taxpayer money is paying for that. And so it has that trickle effect of how just by not supporting on the front end, it can cost more on the back end of things. And so we've really been trying to push for that reasoning. But again, trying to quantify the fact that, when people are taking it for their jobs, that's an economic driver right there. When people are going to the grocery store, that's a huge economic driver right there. When people are able to make their medical appointments, another huge economic driver. And then whenever they are able to go out and do recreational activities, go to the movie theater, go to the parks, do that thing, become part of the community, it just drives that community well-being up and really can help the whole community be successful.
Heather.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in measuring success and telling people those measurements, having a scorecard, a grade card, all those things that tell people performance. And I think economic impact is one of our measurements. So as Chad said, we measure how we as a business contribute to the economy, but we also look at how our infrastructure contributes to the economy. When you deliver a facility, what's the impact of that facility on jobs and materials and taxes? I pay taxes, they all go right back into the community. And so we work really hard to demonstrate that. And then I think absolutely you have to be able to tell the story about how transit drives development. Like I said, we want codes that say build around the transit routes,
Yeah.
build less parking lots. That's how we contribute to economic development. We contribute to land use, which allows for businesses to develop, which allows for housing to be developed. And so it's really important we be part of those conversations.
Yeah, I don't think it's fully appreciated the degree to which, a mixed use community that's more compact in size and served by transit is tremendously more efficient for government. But it also reduces your household expenses. As I've heard it said, if you thought eggs were expensive, look at the cost of a car, right? So you can really save money in a household when you can take more of your trips by transit, and have shorter trips and have more time available as well for other things. I know, but getting to that critical mass of land use and transit and fewer parking lots, we're a big fan of that as well. It's kind of the hidden thing that extends the walking trips and extends the length of the bus ride, all those parking lots. Whereas if you can get a more compact form and be collecting taxes on a mixed use building instead of a parking lot, it's just good for the local economy. Okay, well, I am going to respect the time. This has been a really great conversation. We didn't get at everything, but we got at a hell of a lot. And so I think I'm gonna close. I think we're gonna do the close here. This has been a great report. I recommend you check it out. A lot of credit to Just Strategy for developing the report. Part of the reason they're developing the report is because um, the role of transit is underappreciated. I think that's kind of the big theme. People, don't appreciate the role of transit and don't appreciate the role it plays in small cities. And again, this was designed as 50 to 200,000, but it's also plays a critical role in smaller cities and towns than that, in connecting people. It plays a role in connecting people from rural areas to the center. I think that was a really great point as well. And it's unfortunate that we have this perception in this country that everyone drives, and certainly everybody that lives in smaller cities or more rural areas, with cities or towns in them, that everybody drives. Just isn't so, and that there's a big role for transit to play in connecting all of us. So, um, we could give you very specific recommendations, but if I were to make a single recommendation, it's to echo the ones that were made by all the panelists, which is find a way to raise this as a priority within your own community first. The funding sources are local, in some cases state, in other cases not state, in other cases federal, but demonstrating that there is a public demand for these services and a public value to those services, and then figuring out who to talk to be your champion for that at whatever level of government, I think is a really key strategy. It's how democracy is supposed to work, is people are supposed to hear from the local community about what matters, and be swayed both by the factual data about its value, but as well the personal data, what it means to live in a community where you don't have access to transit, and what it means to live in a community where you do, where you can make it to the dialysis treatment, where you can make it safely to school and have reliable transportation, where you can make it to your job at the place that's outside of downtown and not be precluded from that job because you don't own a car. So again, thank you to everybody. And I am going to share my screen for a moment once again, because if you like what, here we go. If you like this webinar, if you like what we're talking about, this is, times are tough for nonprofits right now. Been reading the news. Times are tough for nonprofits. Times are tough for transit agencies. But if you want to help us raise the visibility of building walkable communities well served by transit with lots of housing and opportunities within them, if you'd like us to help the local advocates do that, if you want to make sure that we can reach more people with the Week Without Driving, uh, please consider donating. We really could use your support. If this is your first webinar, take a look around our website, see what we work on. If you've been to a bunch of webinars, think of the value that you are getting and how you can help make sure that we can keep delivering that value to communities across the country. So please consider donating, and thank you for attending. We will follow up with an email with slides and the report and some follow-up information for everyone who registered. Thanks so much, and thank you again to our panelists, and to the people you don't see behind the screen, a couple of America Walk staffers making sure everything runs well, Madeline and Ruth. Thank you all.